My name is Diane Porter. I'm 71 years old, newly retired, and until last weekend, I thought I understood my family. That illusion shattered the moment Helen Hartley, my daughter-in-law's mother, collapsed onto my kitchen floor, her champagne glass shattering beside her, foam bubbling at the corners of her lips, like something from a medical drama. Screams echoed through the room. Guests surged toward her in panic. Michael, my son, yelled for someone to call 911, while Jessica dropped to her knees beside her mother, sobbing and shaking as if she had no idea what had just happened. But I knew. I stood a few feet away, still holding my own glass, untouched. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't frozen in shock. I was watching. 2 minutes before Helen dropped, I saw Jessica standing by the drinks table, holding a tiny amber bottle in one hand and my favorite champagne glass in the other. I watched her glance over her shoulder before she emptied the vial into the glass with the chip on the rim, the one everyone knew was mine. And I smiled. I thanked her when she brought it to me, acting the part of the tired, grateful mother-in-law. Then, while she turned to greet a neighbor, I casually switched that glass with the one in Helen's hand. Helen had always looked a little lost at parties. She didn't notice. No one noticed. Except me. The party was beautiful, in the way expensive things often are. My son, Michael, insisted on hosting it at my house. A celebration for the sale of my business, he said. A farewell to 40 years of hard work, grit, and long nights. The dining room glowed under rented chandeliers, champagne flowed, and everyone was dressed like they were auditioning for a magazine shoot. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, played hostess with unusual enthusiasm. She greeted guests with a warmth that didn't quite reach her eyes, and I remember thinking, strange, how much effort she was putting into impressing people she didn't even like. Jessica had never been one for domesticity. In the 15 years I'd known her, I'd never once seen her voluntarily load a dishwasher or arrange flowers. Yet that evening, she moved through the party like a polished PR agent, offering flutes of champagne and complimenting everyone's outfits. I stood by the kitchen island, watching her flutter like a moth in silk heels, all smiles and charm. She handed me a drink with a practiced gesture, said something about how proud she was of me. I smiled back, but I didn't drink. Because 5 minutes earlier, I'd seen her do something. It wasn't much, just a flick of the wrist, a small bottle from her clutch, a quick pour into a champagne glass. But it was the glass that caught my attention. My glass, the one with the chipped rim that only I used. I had dozens of champagne flutes, but that one was my favorite. It wasn't elegant, but it was familiar. And Jessica knew that. She was counting on it. I didn't panic. Instead, I took the glass from her hand with a soft thank you and pretended everything was fine. No dramatic reaction. No accusations. I'd been in boardrooms with men who tried to sabotage me mid-contract and smiled while they did it. This was no different. Except it was. Because this wasn't business. This was family. I waited until Jessica turned away to show off her new bracelet to a group of women near the fireplace. Then I moved quietly through the room and stopped next to Helen, her mother. Helen looked lost as always, hovering at the edge of conversations, clutching an empty flute, and scanning the crowd like she was searching for a reason to be there. I slipped the poisoned glass into her hand like it was nothing. She accepted it without question, took a sip, and sighed about how good the champagne tasted. I walked away before it happened. I didn't want to see her fall. I just needed to be far enough that no one could say I was close. When the gasp came, I turned like everyone else. Helen was on the floor, twitching, the glass shattered beside her. Jessica screamed her mother's name. Michael pushed through the crowd. Someone yelled to call 911. Amid the chaos, I stood perfectly still, my own glass still full, untouched. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It wasn't even relief. It was clarity. That moment confirmed everything. Someone had tried to kill me, but they'd underestimated the one thing I never left behind, Not even in retirement. I always watch. Always. That night, after the guests had gone and the police report had been filed as an unfortunate medical episode, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, a pot of coffee, and a question I couldn't ignore. Why? Why would Jessica risk everything on something so reckless, unless she believed she had everything to gain? At first, I thought it was just her. Jessica had always struck me as someone who married up and spent accordingly. But the way Michael reacted at the party, the way his eyes flicked to her when Helen collapsed, told me more than I wanted to believe. It wasn't just her. He knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough. I started digging, not with computers, but with memory. I remembered the mortgage I helped them with, the tuition checks I wrote for their daughter, the times Michael casually mentioned needing help to bridge a rough month. It added up fast. Too fast. My checkbook told a story I hadn't seen coming. Over the past 5 years, I'd given them nearly $200,000. I called in a favor from an old accountant friend, someone who owed me more than a few drinks. He looked into Michael's firm. It was bleeding money. Client loss, bad investments, and unpaid invoices. Jessica's jewelry business? A vanity project. They were living beyond their means, sinking fast, and I'd been the only lifeline. Somewhere between the numbers and the memories, the truth settled in. They weren't just desperate. They were drowning. And desperate people justify awful things. It hurt. Of course it did. I raised that boy. I knew the shape of his fears, his laughter, his dreams. But now, I had to know the shape of his betrayal. The morning after the party, my phone rang just after 7. It was Jessica, her voice syrupy with concern, asking if I was feeling all right. She said she hadn't slept, kept replaying what happened to her mother, and just needed to know I wasn't feeling off. The question came too carefully, like it had been rehearsed. She wasn't calling to comfort me. She was checking to see if her little science experiment had worked. I assured her I felt perfectly fine, maybe even better than usual. She let out a breath and said something about food poisoning, how Helen might have reacted to the shrimp, or maybe mixed up her medications. I knew better. Helen took her vitamins like gospel, at the same time every day, with meals, and logged in a color-coded app on her phone. No, it wasn't the shrimp. It wasn't the pills, and it definitely wasn't an accident. Later that afternoon, Michael showed up with a box of pastries and a soft pitch about assisted living. He said the party had scared him. What if something had happened to me instead of Helen? What if I'd fallen and no one found me for hours? I looked at the worry on his face and saw something colder underneath. Strategy. Positioning. That's when it clicked. The nursing home wasn't about care. It was about control. If they could get me in, they could push for power of attorney, have a doctor declare me mentally unfit, and take everything while I watched from a clean, quiet room filled with pamphlets about bridge night. I smiled at him and thanked him for thinking of me. Then I started writing a list of people I could trust. It was shorter than I'd hoped, but I'd gotten to 71 by knowing when to stop trusting and start planning. I met with my attorney the next morning. David Hartwell had handled my legal matters for over 20 years. He buried my husband, incorporated my business, and knew exactly what to do when I said I feared my family was plotting to steal everything I'd built. We didn't speak in hypotheticals. I told him the truth. Someone tried to poison me, and now they were trying to put me in a box with nurses and soft food while they drained my accounts. David didn't blink. He pulled out a new estate plan and began drawing up a trust that would lock down my assets tighter than a vault. We rewrote my will. If anyone tried to challenge my competency, the bulk of my estate would automatically go to charity. I approved the changes with calm precision. My voice never wavered. But inside, I was burning. Next, I hired Patricia Williams. She runs a private investigations firm I've used before. I asked her to find out everything she could about Jessica and Michael's financials, movements, communications, insurance, and connections. 48 hours later, she came back with enough to make my blood run cold. Jessica had taken out a $500,000 life insurance policy on me 6 months earlier. She listed herself as my caregiver. It was legal. Barely. But it was a motive. And there was more. Michael had been making payments to a psychiatrist named Dr. Richard Stein. Patricia flagged him immediately. He was known in elder law circles as the go-to guy for families who needed a favorable diagnosis. In other words, if they wanted me declared unfit, Stein would sign the papers for a price. I felt the last pieces of the puzzle snap into place. They weren't planning for my decline, they were engineering it. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and started drafting a new script. I would pretend to consider their offer. I'd ask questions. Appear uncertain. Let them believe I was cracking. Meanwhile, David prepared fake power of attorney documents. Patricia installed hidden cameras, and I rehearsed the role I needed to play. The aging, confused mother, ready to hand over her legacy. But I wasn't confused. I was furious and very much awake. Friday morning arrived, gray and humid, the kind of air that presses on your skin like a warning. Jessica and Michael showed up right on time, dressed like they were heading to a closing with a client, all tailored lines and plastic smiles. We sat at my dining table, papers spread between us. Jessica typing away on her laptop as I recited account numbers and financial details. She looked thrilled. Michael looked relieved. I played my part like a pro. When I handed over the last document, the fake power of attorney David had drawn up, I saw it. That flicker in Michael's eyes. Triumph. The belief that after weeks of manipulation, they'd finally won. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands, and said there was just one more document I needed to sign with my attorney present. Then came the doorbell. Only it wasn't David. It was Detective Lisa Morrison, and another officer. Jessica blinked. Michael stood halfway out of his chair. The detective introduced herself, then turned to Jessica and asked if she knew why they were there. Jessica tried to smile, said something about a misunderstanding. The detective didn't flinch. She read from her notebook. The hospital toxicology report showed Helen had ingested a lethal dose of oleander extract. Not medication. Not food poisoning. A rare plant-based poison. Then she held up a sealed evidence bag containing a champagne bottle. Same toxin. Same bottle. Same fingerprints. Jessica paled. Michael froze. When the detective explained that the champagne glass with the highest concentration was the one Diane usually drank from, Jessica finally broke. Her voice pitched, hands shaking. She claimed it must have been an accident. But no one believed her, especially not when the detective presented the life insurance policy and pointed out the beneficiary. Jessica. As the handcuffs clicked, Jessica turned to me. Fury and panic twisted across her face. She said I had no idea what I was doing. I smiled and told her I knew exactly what I was doing. Michael slumped into his chair like the air had been punched out of him. I watched as the last thread of their plan unraveled in real time. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Jessica was sentenced to 18 years. The judge called it a calculated act with chilling intent. Michael got 5. The court acknowledged that while he didn't deliver the poison, he knew enough and did nothing to stop it. I didn't attend the hearings. I watched them from home, with the volume low and the lights off. It was enough to see their faces, hear the verdict, and let the weight of it settle in my chest like a stone. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but nothing came. Grief is strange when the person you're mourning is still alive. Michael wrote me from jail. The letter was long and full of excuses. I read it once, then locked it in my desk without responding. Some betrayals are too deep for answers, but then something unexpected happened. Helen, Jessica's mother, reached out. She was recovering slowly, both from the poisoning and the realization that her own daughter had used her as a pawn. We met for tea one afternoon, 2 women who had both been nearly erased by the same hands. There was no blame, no bitterness, just quiet understanding. She brought me roses from her garden, and I placed them in the vase by the window. It was the first time my house had felt warm in weeks. A few days later, my granddaughter called. Her voice trembled when she said she was sorry, that she didn't know what her parents had planned. She asked if we could talk, maybe visit. I said yes, not because I was ready to forgive, but because she deserved a chance. And maybe I needed one too. The garden started blooming again. I spent more time on the porch, reading, breathing, learning how to be alone without being lonely. I had been so afraid of losing everything, but now that the danger had passed, I realized what I had left was mine, and mine alone. It was quiet, it was safe, it was enough. I still live in the same house. The floors creak in the same places, the roses still bloom in May, and the wind still sings through the old oak in the backyard like it always has. Some days, it feels like nothing has changed, but I know better. Everything has. The security system is state-of-the-art now. My will is airtight, drafted with clauses that no one can challenge. If anyone ever dares to question my capacity again, my estate will skip them entirely and fund scholarships for women over 60 starting their first business. That clause alone makes me smile. Michael is no longer in my will. It hurt at first, but some doors don't deserve to be reopened. My granddaughter knows. She understands why. And maybe one day, she'll help him understand too. Until then, I have no guilt, just boundaries. Last week, she called to tell me she got into law school, said she wants to protect people the way I protected myself. I could hear the pride in her voice. And I won't lie, it lit something in me too. Maybe legacy isn't about money or names carved into buildings. Maybe it's the strength we pass on when we survive the fire and choose not to become the smoke. I sit on the porch most evenings with a cup of tea and a crossword. The world feels slower now. Not emptier, just quieter. There's a peace in knowing you didn't just make it through. You made it through standing tall. That no one took your voice, your mind, your name. I may be old, but I am not weak. And I still have so much left to live for.